very good evening and welcome to CBC Business Outlook. I am Jimmy Kanasha, and today we're here to talk, mainly we'll be focusing on the budget, but we're not doing it the traditional way. Today we start with In Focus, and we have a very, very special guest, important guest, and he's one person who presented an alternative budget, and we'll be right back after this. This is CBC Business Outlook, and today, just as I mentioned, this gentleman presented an alternative budget before the actual budget was presented by the current Minister of Finance. And, one thing we'd like to hear is, has any of it matched his alternative budget? And also, we're going to learn a lot more. And he's popularly known by a lot of people who follow him as Wamsegede Salema, and other names. But we know him as the president of PEP and Patriots for Economic Progress. That is Mr. Sean Tembo. Welcome.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Been very well, thank you.
A very good evening to the Zambian people out there.
Definitely. Yeah. It's so good to have you on our program after quite a while.
It's always a pleasure to be here.
Indeed. Now, Mr. Tembo, President Tembo, you've presented an initial budget months before the current budget was presented to Parliament. And definitely, I'm sure some of the issues that you tackled in that budget might have been implemented in this one, but quickly help us understand a bit further.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Indeed.
For us in the Patriots for Economic Progress, what we have been doing is that for each budget cycle, a budget cycle is from January to December. For each budget cycle, before the official budget is presented, we do submit budget proposals. Mm-hmm. Now, these budget proposals are basically our expectations in terms of what government must address in the budget and how they need to basically allocate the national cake among the various needs of the nation. So we make those budget submissions, and then subsequent to the presentation of the official budget, the way the official budget was presented about a week ago, we then develop and present our alternative national budget for the relevant year. The alternative national budget basically says that if it was us managing the affairs of this republic, this is how we would manage the financial aspect of it. So a budget basically has two critical aspects. You have the income part,
yes,
where you are saying these are the resources that we would basically generate from various sources, whether it is tax through ZRA, non-tax revenue like those fees which you are charged for overspeeding,
yes,
as well as grants from cooperating partners. And of course, there's a loan component if you're going to borrow. Yeah, so that's one component of one aspect of the budget. The other aspect is basically the expenditure, where you're saying this is how we will spend the national resources. This is how much we allocate to defense, to education, to various sectors, to infrastructure development. So basically, in terms of expenditure, it also has two components. There's a recurrent expenditure part of it, which is your usual expenses,
yes,
like paying salaries and the and then there's a development expenditure part of it, where you are basically developing infrastructure and related types of developments. So for us, for this particular year, which is the minister presented the 2020 national budget.
Yes.
And for us as a party, we basically submitted our budget proposals subsequent to that, and we submit this to the Ministry of Finance.
Yes.
We submitted our budget proposals sometime in June, actually, of this year. That was when there was still the previous Minister of Finance, Honorable Manakatwe.
Yes.
And now that the minister has presented his official budget, we have been working on our alternative national budget, which we are presenting on Thursday, 31st of October, this month. It will be presented at Bwalya, Lusaka, along Cairo Road. So basically, we have been presenting these alternative budgets since 2016. And I must mention that we are the only opposition political party in this country that has been consistently developing and presenting both budget proposals as well as alternative national budgets after the official presentation of the budget.
Indeed. Yes. Now, looking at the budget proposals before the one you issued during Honorable Manakatwe's tenure, have any of these expectations been met, even at least one? Have you seen any of them being met?
Well, I would say that the budget which the minister presented a few weeks ago did adopt some of our budget proposals, although they were not adopted to the extent that we would have loved. For example, we emphasized in our budget submissions that government must liquidate the outstanding domestic arrears. Now, domestic arrears are basically amounts of money which government owes various suppliers of goods and services. So let's say you supply stationery to government, I supply meal to a secondary school owned by government. Then government owes so much in these people who have supplied goods and services. The official amount was about 18 billion kwacha last time we checked. Now, we were basically emphasizing to say, look, for as long as you are owing these various players in the economy, there is not going to be much economic activity because there is no liquidity. If I'm owed money and I supplied maybe 2 million kwacha worth of goods to government and they owe me money, I'm a small guy, so it basically means that all my capital is tied up in there. I won't be able to trade and do anything else. So that has the impact of suffocating the economy. And we were very strong on that submission to government. And we were happy, although not very happy, but relatively happy nonetheless, that government did take some steps to try and liquidate the total domestic arrears. They allocated a total of about 2.4 billion kwacha to try and liquidate the domestic arrears. It must be noted that in the 2019 budget, national budget, government only allocated 400 million kwacha towards that particular requirement. So there was about a 600% increment in the allocation. We would have loved government to allocate at least about 9 billion kwacha so that they liquidate at least half of the total amount they owe these people. But we do appreciate the effort made. The second part where we submitted something and it was adopted by government was basically the issue of domestic borrowing through the Bank of Zambia in terms of treasury bills, government bonds and things like that. We have always argued to say, look, for as long as government continues to borrow from the domestic market, it has the effect of crowding out private players. Because if I go to the bank, I want a loan, and the bank can lend the money to government through treasury bills, they would rather lend it to government than lend it to me, because the chances of default if they lend it to me are higher than if they lend it to government. So government will basically crowd out us private players, and private players need access to finance for them to be able to grow, because it is SMEs which basically grow the economy in any country. So we really emphasized on that matter with government in our budget submissions, and we were relatively happy. Again, not so happy, but quite
close enough.
That government reduced plans to reduce its domestic borrowing from about 1.4% of our gross domestic product to about 1.1% of our gross domestic product. That is a step in the right direction, although not a significant enough step. And the other issue which we had really emphasized on in our budget submissions was the issue of fiscal discipline. When you talk about fiscal discipline, we are essentially talking about the need for government to adhere to the budget provisions. Because what has been happening is that government would come up with the official national budget, and then when time comes for implementation, they don't follow the budget. And you find that things which were budgeted for are not funded. And things which were not budgeted for are funded. So it defeats the very essence of having a national budget in the first place if there's no fiscal discipline. It is like you and I, every month end we make a budget to go and do some grocery with our respective wives, let's say in ShopRite, and then you write a list of the essential things you need to buy. When you get into ShopRite, you abandon that list, you just start picking. Again, next month, again, you do another budget list, Again, when you get to the supermarket, you abandon the list. Again, you just start picking. Then what is the essence? What is the essence of sitting down and spending hours developing a budget when you're not going to follow it? So we have always argued to say, for as long as there is no fiscal discipline on the part of government to adhere to the budget provisions, their own budget provisions, then it defeats the very essence of having a budget in the first place. And we are hopeful that possibly the new finance minister is going to enforce fiscal discipline once the budget begins to be implemented on the 1st of January 2020.
Indeed. So what else are you looking forward to seeing in relation to the budget, and also as you present the next alternative budget? Do we expect government to pick something from it, or are we going to see quite a bit of a change in it?
Yeah, government has always tried to pick a few things from both our budget submissions and our alternative national budgets, although they might not come out in the public and say they do, but we know they do. But the challenge that is there, I think, in government is that there's a disconnect between the political leadership and the technocratic leadership of government. Ideally, the technocratic leadership of government is supposed to act as a faithful advisor to the political leadership, because you realize that the political leadership in most cases is not that qualified. Yes, it is basically people who decided to join politics and they became an MP, and the president had a soft spot for them, so they decided to appoint them in his cabinet. So those are the ministers who sit in cabinet. So for you to run an efficient and effective government, you need a seamless connection between the political leadership and the technocratic leadership of government. But as things stand at the moment, that is not there. Largely due to, I wouldn't really put a finger on why it is, but if I was allowed to speculate, I would say it is primarily because of, I think, the high levels of poverty in our country, whereby the technocratic leadership fails to act as a faithful advisor to government for fear of losing their jobs. So at the end of the day, the technocratic leadership of government becomes a bunch of yes banners to the political leadership, in the process misleading the political leadership. They fail to stand firm and advise, be a faithful advisor to government, and tell government, the political leadership of government, to say, look, that path you are taking is a destructive path. And that is why, when you look at examples, that is why we had that protracted debate on GST, goods and sales tax, goods and services tax. That debate should not have been there if our technocratic part of government was acting as a faithful advisor to the political leadership. So that is where the problem is, and for as long as that remains the case, then even if the government wished to pick one or two things from both our budget submissions and our alternative national budget, chances of those proposals being implemented to the benefit of the Zambian people, such chances are very, very low due to that disconnect.
And quickly, it's a good thing you've mentioned goods and sales tax. And recently, in the previously presented budget, we heard the minister say that they actually are omitting that goods and sales tax and going back to the former value-added tax. What's your take on that?
I think that was a very progressive pronunciation on the part of the minister. Speaking for ourselves as Patriots for Economic Progress, and myself particularly as Tembo, I think we always stood firm, against the proposed reform of adopting sales tax to replace value-added tax for a number of reasons. When you look at the nature of sales tax, you realize that it doesn't have that input-output principle which VAT has, whereby my sales are another business person's purchases. The input-output principle in tax is very critical. It is the cornerstone of the entire tax system.
Indeed.
Because it acts as a check. I cannot underestimate, or I cannot declare my sales, because when I issue an invoice, someone will use that invoice as part of their purchases to make a claim. So if I try to underdeclare my sales, the system will be able to pick that there are certain invoices which I issued out which I have not declared. So that input-output principle is a cornerstone of our entire tax system, because when you look at income tax, for example, it is dependent on your profit, and profit is obviously the difference between your sales and your costs. Yes. So if you are able to underdeclare your sales, then you can manipulate your profit, and you can reduce or eliminate how much you pay in income tax. When you look at everything else, when you look at property transfer tax, it is based on the sale, how much you sell your property at. So the input-output principle is critical, and sales tax did not have that. And if we had adopted sales tax, my take would be that our entire tax system would probably have collapsed, because the appetite for tax compliance is very low in this country. It is low in other countries as well, but it is particularly low in Zambia because of the economic hardships and a whole lot of other variables. Our economy is predominantly run by foreign players who are not patriotic to the nation, and they would want to reduce their tax liability as much as they possibly can get away